I've been thinking lately about humor and thinking also about the word anthropomorphization. And the word anthropomorphization annoys me almost as much as any other word because it is often used as a cudgel to maintain human supremacism as opposed to a scalpel to dissect differences between different species. And normally when people will say you shouldn't anthropomorphize, it's because you are saying that dogs feel pain if someone vivisects them, or a bear might feel despair stuck in a cage at a zoo. Oh, don't anthropomorphize. Anthropomorphize, what the word means is to project human qualities onto non-humans. And that's, I mean, first off, it's really arrogant to presume that simply because humans have, some humans feel despair at some times, that therefore it is a human emotion and that no one else ever feels despair. How do we know? Well, one way we can know is by looking in their eyes and by looking at their actions. But in any case, it's one of the things that really bothers me about it is like, well, I'll back up again. And the other day, someone was talking about how plants have photoreceptors on their leaves. They're basically covered with photoreceptors. And we know that if you define smelling as not detecting scents through olfactory receptors, but instead, if you define scents as detecting chemicals in the air through whatever means and changing one's behavior because of the detection of those scents, then plants do smell. Because one plant might be getting eaten by a caterpillar and will be putting off chemicals that announce to other plants there are these caterpillars here eating us, and the other plants will change the chemical composition of their leaves to make them not palatable to those caterpillars, or to make them toxic, or to change somehow to defend themselves. They will defend themselves, which they would call anthropomorphization, because they can't defend themselves. It would make us put quotes around the word defend. And so anyway, there was a discussion going on of, if plants are covered with photoreceptors, I'm looking at a plant here, how do they perceive the world? Do they we have tactile receptors all over our skin. So do they see the way we feel in sort of a universal direction? Because it's not confusing to us, having grown up this way and having evolved this way, to have a feeling coming from this direction, a feeling coming from this direction. It would be confusing to us to be able to see everywhere at once, presumably, because we're used to this sort of front focus. But anyway, the point is that somebody responded to that by saying, this is just a parade of anthropomorphization. And he was dismissing the entire discussion. And that's how it's usually used. And now we're probably done talking about anthropomorphization, and to get to the subject I really want to talk about, which is, this morning I was out just walking through a meadow and thinking about laughter. And now here's what I really want you to think about is, if we use the word anthropomorphization, don't anthropomorphize, as a scalpel instead of as a cudgel, So we recognize that bears are different than humans, but that doesn't make them non-beings. And that dogs are different than humans, but that doesn't make them non-beings. And that insects of various sorts, grasshoppers, are different beings, doesn't make them lesser. How would humor manifest in those different species? We know for sure that rats laugh because scientists have done experiments where they play hide and seek. And this is one scientific experiment I probably don't object to. The scientists played hide and seek with the rats, and the rats would hide and giggle. And rats giggle when they get tickled. And so we can have at least one sense of one tiny bit of rat humor. And a friend of mine 15 years ago showed me dog laughter, that the way she defined it was when the dog starts panting so hard that it starts coughing. And in the right circumstance, other circumstances that could be anxiety or something, but of course we can sometimes laugh when we're anxious too. Anyway, and I've seen that ever since, that there will be a situation where the dog is just so happy and so panting that it starts coughing. I don't know if that's dog laughter, but it seems like it. So what would dog humor be? I was just talking with a friend of mine about this today, who then said, well, I don't know if cats have a sense of humor. And then said, well, maybe when they stare at you and then, sit on the kitchen counter and stare at you and then push your teapot or your teacup off the table, that might be their sense of humor. I don't know. And what would plant humor look? What would bear humor look like? And then I was thinking, so is humor social? So what about creatures who are fundamentally non-social? Werewolves aren't Wolverines are not particularly social. Werewolves might not be social either, too. Anyway, Wolverines I don't think are particularly social. But I laugh when I'm by myself. I still have a sense of humor. And then I was also thinking that how much human humor is based on small cruelties? And I'm not meaning that negatively, because that's why I use the word small. And just a great example from when I was a kid is, I grew up in the country, and when I'm 7 and 8, I thought it was funny when my friend accidentally touched the electric fence and jumped. When I touched the electric fence, it was not quite so funny, except, of course, to my friend, who thought it just as funny as I had thought it when he did. And when you think about a lot of humor, I mean, it is essentially, and that's another thing I'm wondering about, is what's the evolutionary purpose of laughter? And I wonder if some of it is releasing tension at a situation that is slightly uncomfortable, but does not end in tragedy. And I mean, it would not have been funny had my friend touched an electric fence and then had a heart attack and died. But, at 7 years old, when my friend touches the fence, jumps, and then starts running around the backyard screaming for 30 seconds, that's pretty funny. Anyway, so is it going to also be this sort of release of tension? I mean, and humor doesn't have to be cruel, because I don't think that there was, when the rats are playing hide and seek, and I'm sure that the experimenters are laughing too when they're doing this, and that's not cruelty. Anyway, so the real point of this is, I would love for people to think about what humor might look like to different species. And the real point is to think about what life might be like for other species, and to think about, if your perspective is that you are if you're a hummingbird, what sort of things might you think funny? And if you are a honeybee, what sort of things might you think are funny? If you're a crocodile, what sort of things might you think are funny? And if you're a redwood tree, and we can't, of course, know because these other beings are not us. And that's where the don't anthropomorphize is really important, is don't presume that a redwood tree's sense of humor is the same as yours. But at the same time, don't presume that simply because the redwood tree is not you, that it doesn't have a sense of humor.